July 10, 1943. The air was thick with salt and smoke over the southern coast of Sicily. The first rays of dawn pierced the haze, glinting off the wet armor of Sherman tanks lined up on the beaches at Gela. You can almost hear the surf crashing against sandbags and steel, mixed with the rhythmic thrum of propellers overhead. General George S. Patton stood on the ridge, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the horizon. His face was streaked with sweat and grime. Every inch of this beachhead mattered. Every delay could mean disaster. Italian coastal guns still spat fire at the landing forces, and German commandos slipped through shadows, probing weak points in the Allied perimeter. Patton's mind wasn't on caution. It never was. He could feel the rhythm of the battlefield like a pulse. Speed, he muttered almost to himself, is survival. He didn't wait for full reconnaissance reports. He didn't pause for formal orders. The Germans expected delay, predictable logistics, the usual Allied hesitation. He would give them none of that. By midday, the first armored columns roared off the beaches, engines snarling, treads churning red-dusted earth into clouds of grit. Tanks and half-tracks zigzagged through the olive groves and rocky hills, each movement a calculated gamble. Axis forces, already stretched thin, were blindsided. Patton's tanks struck faster than anyone imagined, cutting supply lines, isolating German and Italian battalions before reinforcements could reach them. Somewhere in Rome, Italian generals passed urgent cables to Berlin. Hitler himself is said to have read the reports with disbelief. "Impossible," he muttered. "Armies didn't move this way." And yet there it was, the American advance slicing through Sicily with the confidence of a force twice its size. By evening, Patton had captured key crossroads and river passes, using speed as a weapon more lethal than artillery. His soldiers reported that the desert-like sun had turned the hills golden, but the beauty belied chaos. German soldiers were retreating in confusion, Italian units surrendering in pockets, and the usual rhythm of war had fractured. Patton's psychological tactics, feints, unexpected flanking movements, and radio misinformation had made the Axis commanders second-guess every decision. And then came the intelligence reports. Radar posts, signal intercepts, and scattered reconnaissance told a story Hitler couldn't believe. The Allied forces weren't just advancing. They were anticipating every defensive move, exploiting every weak point, and moving with terrifying precision. Patton's gamble had paid off in hours, not days. But even as the sun set over Sicily, shadows stretched longer than the advancing columns. What the Axis couldn't see yet, and what Patton knew all too well, was that the next 48 hours would redefine the battle entirely. He wasn't just fighting for territory. He was rewriting expectations. And somewhere in Berlin, Hitler was about to realize just how fast the American general could move. July 11, 1943. Dawn barely touched the rugged Sicilian hills, but Patton's tanks were already on the move. The roar of engines echoed through narrow valleys, stirring clouds of dust that glimmered in the morning light. You can almost feel the heat rising from the earth, the tension crawling through every soldier's body as they pressed forward. Axis soldiers scrambled to respond. German infantry dug in behind stone walls, artillery crews manned their positions, and Italian units tried to form a coherent line, but the pace was relentless. Patton didn't just attack, he annihilated the rhythm of their defense. Flanking maneuvers cut off supply convoys before they reached the front, and tanks appeared where the enemy least expected. Each explosion, each screaming shell became a punctuation in the sentence of his strategy. Move fast, strike hard, and leave chaos in your wake. Patton's staff officers were in awe and anxiety. Maps were spread across the hoods of jeeps, radios crackling with urgent updates. "We're ahead of schedule," one officer whispered, almost afraid to break the rhythm of progress. Patton merely smiled, a flash of steely confidence. "Schedule is for men who can't think on their feet," he said, and he meant it. From Rome to Berlin, messages began to circulate. Italian commanders admitted privately that the Americans were moving faster than anyone had anticipated. Hitler, poring over reports at his desk, could barely reconcile what he saw. His generals, seasoned and calculating, were being outmaneuvered not by numbers, but by audacity. Patton's armored columns didn't just break through, they ripped the front open. As the day wore on, Patton reached the outskirts of Rigobudo, a small Sicilian town thought impregnable due to its hilly terrain. His tanks clambered up rocky inclines that maps marked as impassable. Infantry followed, breathing heavily, but moving with that unique mixture of fear and exhilaration soldiers feel when they witness brilliance in motion. Machine gun fire erupted from the town's edges, but Patton's psychological strategy came into play. Fake assaults, rapid advances, and radio chatter made it appear that the American force was twice its size. German officers in the field were stunned. Some wrote frantic messages to their superiors, others simply froze, unsure whether to hold their positions or retreat. By nightfall, dozens of Axis units were cut off from their supply lines, surrounded and paralyzed. Patton's gamble had not only succeeded, it had shattered the expected timeline of the entire campaign. And yet in the shadows of Sicily, a greater revelation loomed. Patton's men knew it. The next strike would decide whether the advance would turn into a rout or stall. The Axis command, blinded by speed and deception, was about to make choices that could cost them everything. July 12, 1943. The sun rose over a Sicilian landscape scarred by fire and movement. Smoke curled from shattered villages, and the distant rumble of tanks echoed across olive groves. You can almost hear it. The nervous chatter of German officers, the clatter of typewriters sending frantic reports to Berlin, and the whispers of Italian commanders admitting defeat before the fight was even over. Hitler's face, we are told, was pale as he read the latest dispatches. Lines on the page told of Patton's lightning advance, of armored columns cutting off entire battalions in a matter of hours. They moved faster than we ever imagined, one Italian general reportedly admitted, his words carrying across command channels like a confession. For Hitler, the reports were not just disappointing, they were unthinkable. How could a single general outpace every expectation of the Axis command? On the ground, German soldiers struggled to regroup. Supply lines were severed. Radios crackled with contradictory orders. Tanks rolled into positions that had been abandoned hours before. Patton's men, despite exhaustion, pressed forward, knowing the enemy was disoriented, that the illusion of overwhelming strength was as powerful as any gun. Patton's approach wasn't just physical, it was psychological warfare. Reconnaissance units reported phantom movements, false armored columns, and feigned assaults. Axis commanders, unsure of where the real attack would hit next, made hasty decisions that often left them exposed. Every mile Patton's forces gained deepened the confusion, and every surrender further shook morale. By late afternoon, the Allies had effectively split several German units from their Italian allies, isolating key positions and forcing retreats across unfamiliar terrain. Tanks barreled through narrow passes, artillery pounded defensive emplacements, and infantry swept through towns with precision. The Axis command was left reacting, not controlling. And somewhere in a command room in Berlin, Hitler's disbelief was turning into fear. The man who had built an empire on surprise and speed now saw an American general executing maneuvers faster than he could anticipate. For Patton, the breakthrough was more than territorial. It was a demonstration of audacity, timing, and psychological dominance. But the true climax had yet to arrive. Even as night fell over Sicily, the shadow of what Patton would attempt next, the complete encirclement of German and Italian forces, loomed over the island. Axis forces knew they were cornered, but they didn't yet understand just how tight the trap was about to close. July 13, 1943. The morning sun hit the jagged hills of Sicily with a harsh, golden glare. Dust hung in the air like a shroud as Patton's armored columns crested a ridge. revealing a sight that made even hardened soldiers stop in their tracks. German and Italian battalions, scattered and scrambling, completely exposed. You can almost feel the tension in the air. Axis officers shouted into radios, giving frantic orders that no one could execute fast enough. Supply trucks were abandoned along narrow mountain roads, ammunition piled in open fields, and soldiers looked for cover where there was none. Patton had them exactly where he wanted. Patton's tanks carved through the hills with terrifying speed, each turret scanning for enemy positions, each track leaving a trail of dust and chaos. Infantry followed closely, exploiting gaps, seizing crossroads, and blocking retreat routes. This wasn't just a military advance. It was a cage closing on the Axis forces. Reports back to Berlin grew more alarming by the hour. Italian generals admitted they had underestimated Patton's boldness. Hitler, reading intercepted communications, reportedly leaned back, muttering in disbelief. "He's moving faster than thought possible." And he wasn't wrong. Within 48 hours, Patton had isolated thousands of enemy troops, creating a pocket that cut off escape, resupply, and coordination. Meanwhile, Patton moved with surgical precision. Reconnaissance units scouted flanks, engineers cleared obstacles, and artillery rained down on strategic positions, forcing retreat where resistance lingered. Each maneuver was choreographed chaos, controlled yet seemingly spontaneous, designed to keep the enemy off balance. By nightfall, Axis forces were trapped in what would later be described as a stunning tactical encirclement. Soldiers surrendered in droves. Officers sent desperate pleas for reinforcements that would never arrive. Patton's men, exhausted but exhilarated, knew they had achieved something few could imagine: a rapid, decisive victory that left the enemy in total disarray. And yet, even as they celebrated, Patton looked toward the horizon. He understood that victory was temporary unless exploited. The next move would cement Allied dominance in Sicily, and for Hitler and his commanders, the realization of what had been lost, and how quickly, was only just beginning to sink in. July 14, 1943. The dust of Sicily still clung to Patton's uniforms, streaked with sweat, grime, and the faint smell of burnt earth. Across the island, German and Italian commanders gathered in hasty meetings, their maps smeared with markers of retreat, red ink blotting routes that no longer existed. You can almost feel the tension in the room, the quiet panic of men realizing that everything they planned had already been undone. Hitler's disbelief had morphed into something sharper: fear. Reports from Italian generals painted a grim picture. Entire divisions were isolated. Supplies had been cut off. Positions once considered secure were overrun before reinforcements could arrive. Every prediction the Axis had made about Allied movements had been shattered. Patton didn't just move faster. He anticipated, outsmarted, and manipulated the flow of battle as though he had been there first. Patton's psychological tactics compounded the chaos. Fake radio transmissions suggested reinforcements where none existed. Feints drew enemy units away from their strongest positions. Even the timing of the armored advances seemed random, but it was calculated to perfection. Soldiers on both sides sensed the momentum. Allied troops surged with confidence. Axis troops faltered under pressure. In Berlin, Hitler reportedly slammed a fist on the desk. "He has done what no one else could," an aide noted. Every hour that Patton pressed forward, the Axis command grew more desperate. Strategic positions in central Sicily teetered on the brink of collapse. Rommel, observing from afar, had faced swift maneuvers before, but the speed and audacity of Patton's advance were almost beyond comprehension. Yet Patton was not done. Even as Axis forces struggled to regroup, he planned the next leap, one that would ensure that the encirclement was complete, that German and Italian forces would have no path forward, and that Sicily would be firmly in Allied hands. It was audacious, it was bold, and it was exactly what Patton did best. But in the shadows of Sicilian hills, Axis commanders began to realize a terrifying truth. This was not just another advance. Patton wasn't merely winning battles, he was redefining how wars could be fought. And for Hitler, the moment of understanding had arrived. July 15, 1943. The morning fog still lingered over the Sicilian hills, but it could not hide the wreckage of what had once been Axis positions. Tanks lay overturned, supply convoys abandoned in dusty fields, and the shrill cries of surrender echoed through the valleys. You can almost hear it, the grinding of armor, the shouted orders, and the uneasy silence of soldiers who know the fight is over before it really began. Patton's men moved like a single, unstoppable organism. Sherman tanks prowled the ridges while infantry cleared towns, capturing Italian and German soldiers with minimal resistance. Engineers dismantled booby traps and repaired roads, ensuring the armored advance never lost momentum. Every action was deliberate, every move calculated to maximize confusion and minimize Allied casualties. The Axis command was in full disarray. Reports from frontline units reached Berlin in fragments, painting a picture of chaos. Hitler, reading each one, could hardly believe what was happening. Italian generals admitted that Allied speed and coordination exceeded any expectation. German officers, usually meticulous and composed, were stunned at how quickly positions they had considered secure were overrun. By midday, the encirclement tightened. German divisions tried to break out, but Patton anticipated every maneuver. Armored flanks cut off escape routes, while artillery rained precise destruction on strategic positions. Soldiers who tried to resist were overwhelmed, not just by firepower, but by the relentless momentum of Patton's advance. By evening, the island's southern axis was firmly under Allied control. Thousands of Axis troops had surrendered, and key towns, previously thought to be strongholds, were captured intact. Patton's rapid strike had achieved what traditional planning deemed impossible, a decisive breakthrough in record time. And yet, the full weight of Patton's genius would not be appreciated until reports reached Berlin and Rome. Hitler's disbelief transformed into alarm. He realized that Patton had not just won a battle, he had shattered the Axis defensive strategy for Sicily entirely. And for the men in the field, the question lingered. Could anyone stop him? July 16, 1943. In a dimly lit office in Berlin, Hitler leaned over a desk cluttered with maps, telegrams, and reports. The numbers stared back at him. Divisions isolated, towns captured, thousands of prisoners taken in barely 2 days. He could feel his jaw tighten. How had one man moved faster than his entire command anticipated? Italian generals had sent urgent communiques admitting the speed and audacity of Patton's advance. Their handwriting trembled with disbelief. "They are everywhere before we even arrive," one line read. Hitler's aides exchanged uneasy glances. The phrase "beyond imagination" was whispered more than once. The man they called the American general had outmaneuvered, outthought, and outpaced them all. Back in Sicily, Patton surveyed the island from a hilltop as the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the dust-choked roads. He didn't smile. His mind was already moving ahead, supply lines, the next push, the consolidation of captured towns. For him, the victory was only the beginning. The enemy's shock was the tool, their disarray a weapon. He had broken through defenses, but now he had to exploit it fully. Allied soldiers whispered stories of the breakthrough. Infantrymen recalled the sight of German tanks abandoned in the open, artillery pieces still smoking from their crews, last attempts to fire, and towns that surrendered almost without a fight. Every step of Patton's advance was a lesson in audacity, speed, and psychological warfare. In Berlin, Hitler's disbelief festered into fear. The Sicilian Campaign, meant to be a controlled delay, had turned into a catastrophe for Axis forces. Patton's rapid maneuvering had exposed flaws in command, overextended defensive lines, and left the enemy scrambling to respond to an unpredictable, unstoppable opponent. And somewhere across radio waves and torn-up maps, the realization hit the Axis command like a hammer. This was not a fluke. This was Patton, the general who could turn audacity into strategy, speed into weaponry, and chaos into victory. Hitler could no longer dismiss him. But Patton, true to form, was already moving forward, eyes on the next horizon, planning the next strike that would continue to leave the Axis in disbelief. The question lingered in the minds of all who witnessed it. How could one man move so fast, so decisively, and leave an empire stunned in just 48 hours?